All right, just going to go ahead and get the focus on me and mute and mute everyone else because that's the way it works. All right. So it is 6:01, time to begin. And last week we discussed the topic of Jewish history, and it was ambitious and superficial, but I wanted to get the whole arc laid out. If you are a member of Temple Israel or able to access our adult education by checking out our website, you may know that we have a much fuller course coming up in March, beginning on Sunday, March 6th at 10 a.m. That will be a 5-week program that is sponsored by NJOP, National Jewish Outreach Program, which will go into a lot more detail about Jewish history. And also, we will go into a 2-part series later on in this year's session, detailing the foundation of the modern state of Israel. But there is another part to history that is incredibly important, but it hasn't happened yet. And that is what we often call the end of days, what we talk about as Bayom Hahu or Olam Haba, the world to come. As we'll see, there are many different terms used, and very confusingly. Or you might just generally talk about this as the afterlife. That is to say, what comes at the end of this world's cycle, as well as what is waiting for us after we pass from this world. That is going to be our topic for tonight. So let's go ahead and get it started. So the first thing to understand is that in Judaism, the afterlife is not clearly explained. It's not explained in Tanakh, in the Torah, or the rest of the Bible. It is not clearly explained in the early teachings of the Chachamim, the sages. It is not clearly explained in the later rabbinic writings either. In fact, the only time you can find a clear, perfect explanation of the whole timeline and everything that'll happen at the end of days and on into the world to come are in the writings of idiots, fools, or people that are just looking for money. It is a very popular genre of literature, I'm glad to say, mostly outside the Jewish realm. But in Judaism, we have the humility to recognize that it has not been explicitly or clearly outlined through our texts. And by that, I mean the Bible itself. However, despite it not being clear, we still have a lot to talk about. Now, you might be asking yourself, so why isn't it clear? I mean, after all, God made it very clear how we were meant to return lost objects, how we were meant to treat each other in our relationships. God made it clear that we need to celebrate Pesach. Why couldn't God have made it clear what happens at the end of days? Well, it's not that God couldn't, it's that God wouldn't. Because the Torah itself, and indeed all of Jewish text, is focused on the Brit, on the covenant. And the point of the covenant is to connect ourselves to God in this world. Right? This world, this life is the purpose of revelation, the purpose of the Torah, and the purpose of all of the education that our sages have tried to give us. What happens afterwards will happen. What happens here, that is what is entirely under our control and why we need the guidance of both Torah and the commentary that comes afterwards. And by following the Torah, by following the Brit, we can improve our lives, we can improve our world, and we can improve our souls. And that is the primary purpose of why God chose to give to the world a revelation or any guidance whatsoever. It wasn't so that we could earn some place on a golden chair for all of eternity. It was so that we could actually improve our lives, our world, ourselves right here in this world. And so the clear explanation of what came next would be not only a distraction, but would be misleading. It would seem to indicate that as being the goal, the purpose. The same way that when a teacher tries to explain a topic and the student says, is this going to be on the test? And the teacher just shakes their head and is so disappointed. because the purpose of learning is not to get a good grade. The purpose of learning is to know the subject. So too, the purpose of life is not to get to heaven or escape damnation. The purpose of life is to live this life correctly. And that is why there is no major focus and no major clarity on these topics found in our texts. Additionally, it would be very hard to render into a clear and accurate description, because what comes after this life will be so completely and wholly different from this life in its lack of material and physical existence, that we lack a language to describe it. How do you describe a person, a place that isn't a place, a time that isn't a time? How do you do that except through poetry and metaphor? And poetry and metaphor are always going to be subject to multiple interpretations and translation. So even with the clearest language and the clearest ideas, it's still going to remain difficult for our human minds to fully grasp without anything to relate it to. And everything we can relate it to through poetry and metaphor is going to potentially cloud the issue as well. So it is hard to make this clear. Nevertheless, the class is not over. We are going to talk about it anyway. But before we do, just one more proof text from our Talmud and based upon the Tanakh of why we focus on this life so much. The teaching comes from Masechet Shabbat. For a day-old infant, they desecrate Shabbat, meaning that if a one-day-old baby, which was considered very iffy for the life prospects of that child in the ancient world, we should never take our children and their good health for granted. And in the ancient world, they knew the odds were not great for most kids. But even for that one-day-old, don't even know if they're going to make it another week, we would desecrate Shabbat. If you need to build a fire for that baby, you build a fire for that baby. If you need to go catch and slaughter a deer to feed it, not that I know why, you do that for that baby. Anything needed to give that baby a chance to live another day, even for Shabbat, one of the holiest of all of our commandments, we break that commandment to save the baby's life. Why? The Torah has said, desecrate for him a single Shabbat so that he may keep many Shabbatot, meaning that, look, we may have to break one Shabbat to help the child, but in the long term, that will allow the child to live and experience all of the Shabbatot, all of the many Shabbats throughout their life. And that is something that must be treasured and must be protected for that child. For David, king of Israel, in death, they don't desecrate Shabbat. Literally, if a person dies on Shabbat, their body becomes what is called muktzah, something we'll talk about when we do Shabbat in more detail, and we leave the body as it is, and we prepare it for burial following the end of Shabbat. Even for David, king of Israel, we do nothing. If we wouldn't go out and light a fire for David once he was dead, we wouldn't go out and catch a deer for David when he is dead. Once he is dead, we keep Shabbat perfectly. While he's alive, or if he's sick, of course, we would do anything to protect the life. But once dead, it's done. Why? Once a person dies, the religious duties no longer take effect for him, meaning that he no longer has mitzvot to perform, and we no longer have mitzvot to perform for him until after Shabbat. That person, their purpose in life is to perform the commandments to guide their soul's journey through the mitzvot. Once they are dead, that purpose is now stopped. And we would not break Shabbat to give them more chances because there are no more chances. And this is in line with what Rabbi Yochanan said, free among the dead, from Psalms 88. When a person dies, he is free of religious duties. He no longer has mitzvot to perform. This is the only plane of existence in which we can do the commandments. The existence we have after will not be an existence of commandedness. But nonetheless, despite the focus on here, despite the focus on life, despite the focus on doing it for its own sake, there is enough clarity in the text that we can piece together a general outline of what sort of things we should be aware of. And basically, you can break it down into three main categories. One, judgment. Two, reward and punishment. And three, life after death. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's look at them in their own time. Judgment. Judaism, through the words of the Torah, as well as the words of the rest of the Bible and our rabbis' teachings, makes it very clear God is the judge of all the world, the Dayan. This is clear throughout every page of the Tanakh and throughout everything else that we say. We also know that all that lives is expected to follow the laws of God. This world was given and created so that we could, through our choices, choose to follow the law, whether it be all of the mitzvot that Judaism has, or whether it be the smaller set of laws that non-Jews are expected to follow, that is what guides them in this world, and that is an expectation. Those that do not follow the law, they are judged for having missed the mark. Right? There is a scorekeeper, if you will. There is a judge that says you did that wrong. And those that do follow the laws, they are judged as having followed the correct path. There is a judge that says, you have done well. That notion of judgment is linked both to this world as well as the afterlife. And it is really undeniable from all of the texts that we have in our tradition. What that leads to, however, is a adding to the notion of reward and punishment. Now, throughout the Tanakh, the main idea is that we do good and that the good we do will actually be good here and now in this world. And the bad we do will be bad here and now in this world. And the benefit and harm will outlive us as well. That if I do something that is amazing and wonderful, that will accrue. That investment of my life will be beneficial to not only my children, but to my community and the generations that come after. Indeed, we believe that we are still benefiting from the amazing merit of people like Abraham and Sarah and the other avot, the other ancestors. On the other hand, when you do something wrong, not only does that open the door for bad to come back to haunt you. If you are the kind of person that will kick a dog, don't be surprised if the dog bites you, as a very superficial example. But also, if you do bad, you should not be surprised that there is lingering after effect in this world from the bad that you do. However, passages such as the last chapter of Isaiah indicate that there is punishment and reward beyond this life as well, that the scales will be balanced to account for leftover debts, an idea I developed in much more detail during my last Rosh Hashanah sermon. Now, this notion of an after effect for reward and punishment may sound a little strange. Why not just have all of the punishment be done here, now, in this world? And the primary reason is because, one, the reward that can come in the afterlife will be far superior to a mere physical reward we have in this world. And two, that there is a delay on any punishment or negative pushback for many of our actions in this world, because God is giving us time for a tshuva, for repentance, to change our decision, to move back towards the correct way, to fix our mistake, to seek apology from God or from other humans from what we have done. And if there was an immediate reward punishment, do something right and $100 appears in your bank account, do something wrong and you lose $100, then there would never be a chance to actually learn from the immediate action that you did. You might learn general tendencies, but you would not be learning the broader lessons that Judaism is offering. So we should not be surprised that a lot of the reward and punishment is postponed until after all of our opportunities to either change our life for the good or change our life for the bad have been explored from our entire life. Which leads to, well, what type of punishment will that be? Oftentimes we will talk in Judaism about the term Gehenna or Gehinom. Now, many people will equate this to the English word hell, but there are some significant differences. The first off is that we actually know Gehinnom. We actually know this particular place. In fact, if you go to visit Israel, you can visit this place. It is a valley just outside Jerusalem. Well, basically in Jerusalem by the modern definitions of the city boundaries, but outside what would have been the old city boundaries of the ancient world. And this particular area was an area where they performed rites of Molech in particular. You can learn more about this from Chronicles and Second Kings. The citations are here on the page. And during the days of the people committing the great crimes that they performed for this pagan ritual, it became a byword, a synonym for a place of suffering caused by evil. So it became kind of poetic justice to say that people who had committed crimes in Gehinnom would end up being suffering in Gehinnom. Now, this cannot mean literally the actual Gehinnom, the actual valley of Hinnom, because we're not talking about 3,000 years ago, we're talking about the future. Instead, it is saying that those people that committed crimes, like those of Gehinnom, will end up suffering like those they made suffer in Gehinnom. Now, as we'll see later on as we go through, this cannot be a physical suffering, because the whole point of Olam Haba, the next phase of our existence, is a lack of corporeal body. But this metaphor of suffering and the poetic justice that it represents is a powerful reminder, especially to the generations closest to these acts, but even to us today, to think about the punishment we receive for the suffering that we have caused as being an appropriate measure and balance. Like I say, a balancing of the debt. But how will this be allocated? Well, we have a two-part text here. It doesn't finish on this page, so make sure that you keep flipping, because there are two major opinions about how this will work that are outlined in the Talmud. The first comes from Beit Shammai, the house of Shammai. There will be three groups on the day of judgment: the 100% righteous, the 100% wicked, and the in-betweeners. Now, the righteous, the perfectly righteous, immediately are inscribed and sealed for an eternal life. Right? There's no need to review the record. They are perfect, and boom, Olam Haba, the world to come, is theirs. They're on their way. The wicked, that is to say, the 100% wicked, well, they are immediately inscribed and sealed for Gehinnom, as we talked about, as it is written, and many of those who sleep in the dust of earth shall awake, some to eternal life, the 100% righteous, and some to shame and everlasting contempt, the 100% wicked. Now, you will notice, first of all, even though we're going to see a rebuttal to this view, that Beit Shammai and also Beit Hillel are talking about the position that we have in the afterlife as being earned by the deeds that we actually perform, and of course, any remedy that we give for any of our mistakes. Just as a reminder, when we get closer to Rosh Hashanah, we'll probably talk about this more, that when you commit a mistake and you fix it, that mistake is erased. You are not wicked if you stole something and then returned it and paid whatever the penalty was meant to be. You are somebody who made a mistake, and that just gives you entry into the human race. What this is reminding us, however, is that Judaism is focused on the deeds of the person, not their beliefs. Yes, there are certain beliefs, which we talked about way back at the beginning, that are quite essential to understanding Judaism and guiding us properly in our life. But this focus here is, as you might expect, on the actions we take. We do not damn people who just, forget to believe in the right savior, if you will. And savior is something we will talk about near the end tonight. Now, the in-betweeners, which is the vast majority of humanity, go down to Gehenna, cry out, and rise, as it is written in Zechariah, and I will put this third into the fire and refine them as one refines silver and test them as gold is tested. They will call on my name and I will answer them. And concerning this group, Hannah said from the book of Samuel, the Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up, using Sheol, which was one of the ancient words for the afterlife, as a metaphor for Gehinnom, for this place of punishment, and saying, in the words of Beit Shammai, that for most of humanity, you will finish off having done some bad things and some good things, and for the bad things, you will need to do tshuva through this moment of painful recollection and realization, and that will then prepare you to move on without that baggage of all that had been done wrong. Now, that is one opinion from Beit Shammai. Beit Hillel disagrees. Beit Hillel says, but God, who abounds in mercy, leans towards mercy. And concerning them, David said from Psalm 116, I love the Lord because he has heard my voice and my supplications. And concerning them, David stated the whole passage, meaning continuing on in that psalm, the Lord preserves the simple. When I was brought low, he saved me. So Beit Hillel isn't saying that there won't be reward and punishment, that there won't be judgment, but is saying that we should understand that this is not a strict mechanical system, that God will, of course, tilt the balance towards the side of compassion and mercy, that God does not want people to suffer, but instead wants people to rise up from their misdeeds and move forward into the next stage of their existence. So we should take solace and take heart. Now, there is yet another opinion on this regarding what happens at the end of day in the judgment period. This is also taken from the Talmud. Israelite and Gentile wrongdoers who follow their bodies, meaning listening to their own inclinations rather than God's teachings, go down to Gehenna and are judged there for 12 months. This is the introduction of the idea of a limited period for the potential punishment. After 12 months, their body is consumed, their soul is burned, and a wind scatters them under the feet of the righteous. Right? That is your punishment, and then you are gone. Just gone. As it says from Malachi, and you shall tread down the wicked, for they will be ashes under the soles of your feet. So the rabbi here is reading that as a literal statement rather than purely metaphorical, and saying that, yes, the really 100% wicked people, they will get their comeuppance, they will get punishment, and then their spirit will simply cease to be. They will be erased, if you will, from all of existence. That is one opinion. Now, that opinion contradicts the opinions of the earlier ones, but you can notice as well that, again, it is trying to say that God is not punishing them forever. God is merely punishing them for the maximum crime that they might have committed, and then they simply have no place in any future existence. However, the sectarians, the informers, and heretics, those who denied the Torah, who denied the resurrection of the dead, who separated themselves from the ways of the community, who tyrannized the land of the living, and who sinned and caused many others to sin, such as Jeroboam, the son of Nevat, and his associates, they go down to Gehenna and are judged there for generations, meaning for a much longer period. That there are some super sinners, there are some super wicked, there are some, as you might use in the modern metaphor, Hitlers of all of history, and they have graduated from being typical people that do terrible, terrible things to being supervillains, absolutely beyond the pale of understanding, and their punishment will need longer than just a 12-month. As we get from Isaiah again from the final chapter, and they shall go forth and look on the dead bodies of the men that have rebelled against me, for their worms shall not die, their fire shall not be quenched. Again, implying a much extended period of punishment. Now, from all of these sources, it might seem that there is a lot of eternal, forever, long time. And indeed, those are the terminologies that are used, but that term is used in a very particular way. Our texts use the time measurement of Gehinnom, 12 months or many seasons, as a way of emphasizing a sin. So, for example, when on other parts of our teachings it says one that shames another or commits adultery or murder will go down to Gehinnom and not come up, they're not literally saying that causing somebody embarrassment once is a crime that will prevent you from ever escaping judgment for it, but instead making you realize that it is a significant crime. It is not trivial. Unfortunately, many people do treat embarrassing another as being too trivial. Likewise, in Sanhedrin, only very specific individuals are singled out for this punishment. Again, perhaps for emphasis. In Masechet Sanhedrin in the Talmud, when they talk about different people and special categories, they are trying to draw attention to the unique problems of their crimes, not actually making a official list of the naughty that are going to be punished in some way forever. And of course, there is a difference between eternal punishment and failing to reach Olam Haba, the world to come. As we saw from the earlier text, the idea that the wicked would be punished for a year and then their souls would simply be extinguished, they are still not being punished more than the year. We may wonder whether or not the extinguishing of their soul is a fitting punishment. But again, remember, this would only be for the absolute 100% wicked. But in the very least, we are not talking about a perpetual, eternal suffering of that person. Which leads us to the question of, well, what will it be like during that time? What will it be like in the time that follows? And we do have a lot of evidence from the Tanakh itself that there is life after death. Now, both those words are a little tricky to define, but we do seem to have indications that there will be something after the time that is marked by our passing from our regular life. What such texts? Well, Genesis 25, this was the total span of Abraham's life, 175 years. And Abraham breathed his last, dying at a good ripe age, old and contented, and he was gathered to his kin. Now, perfectly normal end-of-life statement for the Torah and Tanakh, although Abraham gets a special flourish. But how can we say that he was gathered to his kin? We are told very explicitly in Lech Lecha, when God asks him to come to the land of Israel, that he is leaving behind his ancestors. He is leaving behind their land. He is leaving behind his family. So when he dies and is buried in Hebron in Israel, he is not physically being gathered to his kin in that place. Later, ancestors will be, and the others who are buried alongside Abraham, we could certainly understand this phrase as describing the literal placement of their grave. But for Abraham, absolutely explicitly, we know he is not able to be buried physically in the cemetery with his ancestors. Therefore, this is hinting that the gathering to his family implies a gathering to his family after this life. Likewise, when Ishmael passes away, 137 years, then he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his kin. Unlike Isaac, Ishmael was not buried in Machpelah. He was not buried in that same cavern system. And so again, we must believe that he is joining Abraham in the next stage of our life, rather than joining him merely in the graveyard. Likewise, from Samuel 2, we see from no less than David HaMelech, King David, on the occasion of the passing of one of his sons. But now that he is dead, why should I go on fasting? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me. Again, showing a belief that there is more to our life after this life. And from Kohelet, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. This phrase is recited at our funerals as a reminder that even though we are returning the body to the soil, to the earth that it was crafted from, we must recognize that the spirit, the soul, the neshama, moves on into the next stage of existence. And likewise in Samuel 2, Saul and Jonathan, the lovely and pleasant and in their lives, even in their death, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. The key phrase here being that even in death, they were not divided. If the Tanakh was trying to tell us that this life was the end, period, full stop, no more, then of course they were divided. They were killed and they would have been buried separately. But if we believe that their souls continue to exist, then we understand that they are not divided even as they move to the next life. Any questions or comments so far? If it's confusing and complicated, if it seems a little bit ambiguous, if it seems like I'm not proving a perfect, clear example of what all this means, good. That is the point. We have these core beliefs, this understanding of judgment, reward, punishment, and life after death, but we should not ever think that we have it nailed down perfectly and that we can go off and write our book about it. Instead, we have faith that it will work correctly and well within the general guidelines and outline that we have received through our Bible as well as through our sages. Now, life after death means more in our traditional beliefs than just the continuation of our soul. Rabbinic Judaism believes that there will be a period of bodily resurrection, physical resurrection of all people at some point along that timeline of the end of days. Now, this is generally thought to be at some point after Mashiach, the Messiah, comes, and at the time when the world is being perfected. This is mentioned repeatedly and stressed in the second prayer of the Amidah, what we call the Givorot, where God is called Mechaye Metim, the one who gives life to the dead. And this is an important principle in Judaism for believing that at some point there will be a chance for all of those who have lived in this world before the Messiah came, before the world was perfected, to experience the goodness of this world as it should be, without all of the unnecessary suffering that has been inflicted by so many through so many mistakes over the generations. Now, there is still another part, however, to that after existence, and the transition between one and the other is not 100% clear, because we are told quite astutely by Rambam in the Mishnah Torah, in the world to come, Olam Haba, there is nothing corporeal, nothing physical, no material substance. There are only souls of the righteous without bodies, like the ministering angels. The righteous attain to a knowledge and realization of truth concerning God, to which they had not attained while they were in the murky and lowly body. Now, he rightly points out that it is hard for us to truly understand and connect to God in this world, although we can certainly try and reach great heights, because we are held back by our experiences, which are all fueled only by material world. It is only in Olam Haba that we will be disconnected from that materiality and able to move higher and higher. So there will definitely be a period, and indeed the final period of our existence in that non-corporeal, in that non-body manner. Now, that term Olam Haba that I keep throwing around, which means the world to come, that term is a little slippery because it is not always used the same way by everyone. For some of them, it means this world, meaning, Earth as we know it, but after the Mashiach has come. When people talk about Olam Haba, they are talking about this world once it has been made perfect. This same time period is often sometimes referred to as Gan Eden, meaning the Garden of Eden, as well, because the idea would be this world is made as perfect as Gan Eden was supposed to be for us. However, the term Gan Eden can also mean heaven. And the term Olam Haba can also mean heaven, meaning the world to come beyond physical existence. And that is going to be confusing. And I apologize. We do not have an editor-in-chief that has reviewed all of Jewish literature for a few thousand years. And we know that there are multiple opinions, any one of which or all of which may be right in their own way. Now, one topic that comes up more now than it did a couple hundred years ago is the topic of reincarnation. This is a relatively new concept to Judaism. Despite what some people may be trying to teach, it does not have a firm foundation in Jewish history. And more importantly, it doesn't really fit with everything we know about what the Torah and our sages have taught us about life. One, we believe that a soul has only will have one journey, and it will be judged for that journey, for both the good and the bad. And the body cannot be rewarded or punished for the previous actions of the soul in a different body. Imagine somebody, and people do say this sort of nonsense, saying, here is Mr. Smith, and Mr. Smith is blind because Mr. Smith looked at bad things in his previous life, and now he is being punished. This is simply ridiculous from any sense of justice from God, because Mr. Smith didn't do it. And Mr. Smith, even if his soul was there, which it can't be, if Mr. Smith had been there, he doesn't remember it now. How can he do tshuva? How can he actually connect to God correctly to make amends for whatever that problem might have been? Instead, you would be saying that he is being punished and suffering for something of which he has no knowledge and has no control over. And that is the opposite of justice. And that is why Judaism does not make such claims, except for, unfortunately, some groups that have decided to make this more popular. But it seems from all appearances as though it is a foreign influence that was brought in by people who had been exposed to it from other teachings of other faiths. There is an additional problem with reincarnation, which is math. Reincarnation requires that a soul lives multiple times, moving through life. However, we would need more new souls to be constantly be born, because there are more people being born now than any time before in human history. We began the 20th century with maybe a billion people, and now we are up to about 8 billion. Even if everybody who had ever lived was being recycled into this world, you would still need more souls to be created. And as we would continue to move through life, or rather through the centuries, you would get a higher and higher and higher percentage of brand new souls that are being born into a world not of their making and born into bodies not of their choice that would be blank slates. This would mean that we would be moving away from perfecting the world rather than moving towards it. And that is simply not a tenable position. In case you're thinking, well, maybe the animals would make up the extra souls, or maybe some of the extra souls are going into animals, which makes even more problems for the math. We don't consider animals to be judged for their behavior. A wolf that eats a deer is not murdering, it's doing what wolves do. And you cannot say good wolf or bad wolf, you simply say it's a wolf. So there is no way to imagine them as part of the cycle of climbing up with our understanding of justice. Okay, long digression, but an important one. Now, back to one that is even more important because it is frightfully misunderstood by so many. Judaism believes in Mashiach, in the Messiah. Who will be that Messiah is something that we have guidelines for, signposts for, and I can tell you right now, before we have to read any of the text, they haven't shown up. Right? The Messiah has not yet walked upon this earth. The Messiah is not here. The Messiah has not taught. The Messiah has not led. We are still waiting for the Messiah, like we talked about way back in the second class about Jewish belief. But what are those signs? What would we be looking for to identify somebody as Mashiach? Well, again, Rambam in Mishnah Torah lays it out very clearly, lays it out so clearly, in fact, that this section was censored by the Catholic Church during the Middle Ages in Europe to prevent Jews from studying it, because clearly it is going to explain why we do not believe the person they believe is the Messiah is the Messiah. And unfortunately, during those days, the Catholic Church, which has come a long way, but back in those days, they used their power and position to prevent us from studying and expressing our own beliefs. But here is Rambam in his own words. Now, if a king should arise from the house of David, first criteria, the person needs to be from the house of David, and they need to be of that royal lineage. Excuse me. And that person is versed in Torah and engages in commandments, meaning they're actually following the rules, as did David, his forefather, in accordance with both the written and oral Torahs. See the third class in the series when we talked about the texts. and he enjoins all of Israel to follow in its ways and encourages them to repair its breaches. He is a teacher, he is a leader, he is somebody that is encouraging and getting more people to be committed to our path. And he fights the wars of God, meaning defending Judaism and what is right. Then he may be presumed to be the Messiah. He gets a gold star, and we think he is a very possible Messiah. Note, this doesn't mean he is, but it means that we should relate to him as though he might be. If he succeeds, very important word, in his efforts and defeats the enemies around and builds the sanctuary in its proper place, meaning the Temple of Jerusalem, and gathers the dispersed of Israel, he is definitely the Messiah. Now, you'll notice nobody has met those criteria. We have not all been gathered in. The temple has not been built. We have not defeated all the evil of the world. The Messiah has not yet come. We have had some righteous people. We have had some decent candidates. Not any lately, but we are still short of a Messiah. Because if he does not succeed in these matters or is killed, we will know that he was not the one the Torah has promised. He is merely to be considered like all the other exemplary and qualified kings of the house of David who have died. God set him up only to try the masses, as it says, and some of the wise will stumble, to refine among them and to purify and make white, even to the time of the end. For it is yet the time from the time appointed. Meaning that there will be false messiahs, some of whom are simply close but do not succeed, others who are deliberate charlatans and tricksters. And we need to be able to tell the difference. We can't allow our hope and dreams to blind us to the many problems with all of the major candidates that have tried to put themselves forward in the centuries. Nonetheless, he doesn't leave us only with that sour note. The thoughts of the creator of the world are beyond any man's understanding. That always means that Rambam is about to say something that is confusing, but we should think about it deeply. For our ways are not his ways, and our thoughts are not his thoughts. And all the doings of Jesus the Nazarene and that of the Ishmaelite, meaning Muhammad, who came after him, are nothing but to pave the way for the King Messiah and to prepare the entire world to worship God together. For, as it says, for then I will turn to the peoples a pure language, that they may all call upon the name of the Lord to serve him with one consent. What he is saying here is that, yes, we do not believe that Jesus was or is the Messiah, and we do not believe that Muhammad was or is our Messiah, bringing salvation to the world. But we do recognize that through the instruments of both Christianity and Islam, that the world has, in many ways, been brought closer to God, that the idea of monotheism and the rejection of idolatry has taken root across the world in large measure. And we can recognize that many of the teachings of Torah have found their way through these other religions to be part of the common ethics and morality of the world, which will definitely make the work of the actual Messiah a lot easier. Now, you might be wondering then, so what will the end of days look like when this Messiah shows up and everything is made perfect? Said Samuel, the only difference between this age and the days of the Messiah is Israel's subjugation to the kingdoms of the world alone. As it is said, for the poor shall never cease out of the land, from Deuteronomy 15. What this means is we are not looking for miracles. We are not looking for food to rain down from the sky. We are not looking for the streets to turn to gold, which wouldn't be good for inflation anyway. We are hoping that the world will awaken to the teachings of the Messiah, which are the teachings that God wishes us to use to bring the world to this time of peace and a time of both national peace, but also individual peace within ourselves and among each other. That is what we are hoping for. It is not going to be the rainbow and unicorn kind of pictures that some people imagine. It will be this world done right. All the ingredients are already here. It's just a matter of turning our hearts towards God in a way that will make it a permanent Eden for all of us. we need someone to teach us. We need someone to guide us, and that is Mashiach's goal. We don't need someone to wave a magic wand, and we're not expecting someone to show up and perform a bunch of flashy miracles. We are expecting someone to show up to capture the hearts, the minds, and the spirit of the world, and let us all walk together, as Zephaniah says, with one consent. That's where we are headed. As he points out, do not presume that in the Messianic age, any facet of the world's nature will change, or there will be new innovations in the work of creation. Gravity will still be gravity. The sun will still be shining. The world will continue according to its pattern. Although Isaiah 11 states, the wolf will dwell with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the young goat, these words are a metaphor and a parable. You should not expect actual wolves to be lying down next to actual lambs. The interpretation of the prophecy is as follows. Israel will dwell securely together with the wicked Gentiles who are likened to a wolf and a leopard. As in the prophecy of Jeremiah, a wolf from the wilderness shall spoil them, and a leopard will stalk their cities. So again, in Jeremiah, the wolf is obviously a metaphor for those that were hunting us. And in the end of days, they will cease hunting us, and we will be able to live together in peace. They will all return to the truth faith, meaning to a monotheism of God, and no longer steal or destroy. Rather, they will eat permitted food at peace with Israel, as Isaiah 11:7 states, the lion, will eat straw like an ox. That is our ultimate goal. That is our ultimate period. Now, how will we know this is about to happen? Again, he continues, there are some sages who say that Elijah's coming will precede the coming of Mashiach. All of these and similar matters cannot be definitely known by man until they occur, for these matters are undefined in the prophet's words, and even the wise men have no established tradition regarding these matters except their own interpretation of the verses. Therefore, there is a controversy among them regarding these matters. Now note, we have controversy about this. That doesn't mean that we form new groups and become sectarians and have new splinters. We are still unified despite that controversy. Regardless of the debate concerning these questions, neither the order of the occurrence of these events or their precise details are among the fundamental principles of the faith. That they will occur? Yes. Exactly what they will look like and when? No. A person should not occupy himself with the Agadot and the homiletics concerning these and similar matters, meaning don't dwell on these ideas, nor should he consider them as essentials, for study of them will neither bring fear or love of God. Similarly, one should not try to determine the appointed time for Mashiach's coming. The number of people who waste their time trying to calculate the day they think the Messiah will arrive are legion, and it is a sad waste of their time and the energy that they could be devoting to actually improving their life and the life of the world around them. In that era, meaning the end of days, there will be neither famine or war, envy or competition, for goodwill will flow in abundance, and all the delights will be freely available as dust. That when we reach this stage, all of the problems that have continued to plague us, which arise from scarcity, from competition, from fear, and from anger, those problems will disappear because scarcity, fear, and anger are a result of the human choices rather than a feature of this world. This world can provide for all of us with absolute abundant plenty, and if we were to decide to do that tomorrow, then by the day the Mashiach showed up, there would be very little left to do. Unfortunately, there are far too many devoted to their greed, anger, and fear, and that means we definitely still need a guide to bring us to that final step. But that final step will come. Eventually, we will cross that threshold into the days of Mashiach. It is up to us to go back to our very beginning, to do everything we can to follow Torah in this life, for this world, for this time. That is our goal. What happens next will eventually happen. God will bring us there as God will bring us there. I often say this is like when we are on taking a long train ride. The train will reach the destination. It is on the tracks. It will get there eventually. But you get to decide what the ride is going to be like in your compartment, in your area, in your life. your actions determine what it will be like as we journey towards that destination. And we may not be able to speed up the train. We might not. We're not 100% sure, but we do know that we can improve our life during that journey. And that is Judaism's focus. And that is why that is all we're going to say about the end of days for tonight. Any final questions, though? I don't want to make it sound like you can't ask a question. All right, then we will finish for tonight, and I hope to see everybody next time, and I hope everybody has a wonderful Shabbat. Take care and be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.